the Adani Group. A very warm welcome to my co-panelists on this webinar today, as we are calling it. Rahul Kamal, the Executive Director of Business Today. Welcome, Rahul. Good to have you with us.
Great to be here.
Saurabh Majumdar, the editor of the Business Today magazine. I don't need to remind you all that Business Today, the most credible, the oldest uh, business magazine in India. Also with us, my colleague Shailendra Bhatnagar. He is the editor for markets at Business Today. He's had a bit of a rough day tracking all the red on the indices. But that's not what we are going to discuss today. We are discussing Business Today's flagship offering that we started, and this is going to be the third edition of it. And viewers, if you've seen India at 100 all over, know that Business Today was the one to, in some ways, bring this theme to the mass market, to the media, and two very special events. And now the third one that is taking place in New Delhi at the Bharat Mandapam, one of the most exclusive special venues for this kind of a thought leadership forum. This will be the third edition, but this is the original India at 100 thought leadership forum. So ignore all the copycats. And I want to bring in Rahul, Saurav, and Shell. But starting with you, Rahul, India at 100, what are we doing looking so ahead into the future? And why are we doing this at all?
When everyone was marking 75 years of India's independence, Siddharth, that's when the Business Today team came up with a forward-looking vision that let's speak about India at 100 because India at 75 is here and now. There's very little that can be done in this moment. Let's look into the future and see what can we do to unlock India's economic potential. The Prime Minister gave his own take on it, calling this Amrit Kal, his idea of having a Viksit Bharat by the year 2047 when we complete 100 years. What Business Today's focus really was on what can we do to unlock our economic potential, what do we need to do to ensure that things fall into place, and what can potentially go wrong as well, to give it a holistic framework. So over the past two editions, we've had some of the biggest names in corporate India speak at the India 100 Summit. We've had some global thought leaders, top academics, and the program for India at 100 is just looking so compelling. This is happening, as you mentioned, at the Leaders Lounge at the Bharat Mandapam. So this is the very venue where Prime Minister Modi hosted the 21 heads of state and the other international bodies at the Bharat Mandapam. So this is happening at the Leaders Lounge. So that's very special because that's where they were talking about India's place in the world. And this really talks about India's place in the global economy. And some very, very sharp thinkers, corporates already confirming their presence. And we're really excited about how this whole program is shaping together to touch upon the themes. And Siddharth, you've actually been working on a session-by-session thematic structure for each of the ideas. So do you want to take our viewers through the broad ideas that you and your team hope to develop during the India 100 program?
Absolutely. And before Saurav comes in on this, Rahul, just to add and answer your question, what are we trying to discuss? Because there are lots of forums that discuss all manner of things. But here at Business Today, we specialize in coming to the point, really. And this year, what we are really looking forward to is how can we put in place thought leadership and ignite a debate around what are the key things that this country needs to do at the economic level, at the level of businesses, at the level of markets where capital is raised and unmade, and what can we do as individuals to propel everyone who is a stakeholder in this economy to take it forward. Now, what are those sessions? For example, we want to discuss at this forum how India can escape the middle income trap. Now, this may sound complicated, but what it really means, and this is about every citizen, the arm army of this country, how do they increase their per capita income? Because growth is meaningless, and sort of come in here, growth is meaningless unless it percolates down to the masses, to the last person. And that's why all the thought leaders, some of you who have already seen the poster and many more that will get revealed over the next few days in the run-up to the event, that's where we are going to hear from the best and the brightest. How do we turn around those parts of the economy that need that, and how do we continue to propel other areas that are doing very well? But for India to achieve the kind of economic growth and potential that we believe it has, lots of things really need to be done, Saurabh.
Thank you, Siddharth, and a very warm welcome to all the participants and all those listening to us today and watching us. I think what Rahul mentioned, I just wanted to take a little cue from there. You know, the venue itself is the venue where the G20 last year was held with India as presidency. Now, that itself was to us, and we did a special issue of Business Today last year, as you know, Siddharth, that we put that one up with the Prime Minister's interview, where he laid actually the groundwork for what is his vision for a Viksit Bharat in that sense, with the G20 as the backdrop. I think what you said is absolutely correct. In order to for India to break out of this so-called middle income trap, which many nations have fallen into, you need sustained growth of around 7 to 10% for 20, 30 years, and that's something which you cannot have. You cannot just wish. You cannot wish for alone. You have to make detailed. There has to be work on the ground for that. And I think some of those things have started work already under this government, and this is the third term of this current government. And I think over the last two terms also, the stage has been set. Now look at whether it is DPI, whether it is Jandhan, whether it is the kind of manufacturing initiatives which this government has taken, whether it is this recent budget which talks about an employment linked incentive, which is aimed at giving more and more jobs and push this whole economic agenda with the jobs thing at the center. I think many of these things together will come, sort of coalesce into the overall vision for a Viksit Bharat by 2047.
A Viksit Bharat by 2047. And before Shell comes in, all those who have joined this webinar, you are welcome to ask questions. Do raise your hand, and you could also type in the question that you have, and I'll try and come to you in the time that we have. Shell, Viksit Bharat by 2047, but also an Atmanirbhar market that we are already seeing in 2024. What do the markets tell us about India's growth 20-25 years down the line? Because that's where most of the new capital formation is happening for driving entrepreneurship, economic growth, and obviously jobs as well, Shell.
Siddharth, thank you for having me over. And I think the most exciting and the most visible change that is happening as far as the Indian economic landscape is concerned is the capital markets. And they are purely now being driven by local money. Also, we have this problem over the last 1 day or two where a lot of selling pressure is coming. But all this is because of problems overseas. There is nothing at all to suggest that the Indian equity bandwagon is sort of derailing or slowing down. It's a problem that we are facing because of problems between the US and the Japanese currency. Nothing to do with us. And over the last 4 years, we've seen this acceleration of domestic mutual funds, the SIPs that are coming in from a low of about 4,000 crore rupees a month. We are now somewhere in the vicinity of 22,000 crore. In fact, a lot of banks have now started raising red flags to the finance ministry that money that was supposed to come into fixed deposits is moving into markets.
No, so the question, Shell, I'm interrupting you because we are starting to get questions, but I had one question.
Yeah.
What will the Sensex and Nifty levels be in 2047?
Well, so that's a mathematical answer that I can give you very clearly. We'll compound somewhere like 12-13% a year. So that's doubling in 6 years or so. So between 47 and 24, we have about 23 years left and 4 compounding. So if 50 is at 25, that's 50, 1,000, 2,000, 4 lakhs.
Okay, a Sensex level of 4 lakh. We'll hold you to 50. That promise. Rahul, Saurav, lots of questions coming in. I just want to take the first one from someone who's anonymous. So sorry, we can't name you. Give us your real name and you'll get to hear your name as well. What are the dates for this seminar? It's actually a forum at the Bharat Mandapam. The date is the 20th of August. How do we register? Well, that's a very good question. Please visit btindia at 100.in. I'm going to spell that out for you, and my colleagues are also going to write that in the chat reply. btindia 80 at 100.in. That's where you can register. इस पूरे इवेंट में भारत के विकास के लिए हम क्या करेंगे? We'll answer that question. There's another question from Ashok Jambur. The first one was from Anisur. And that question is, how exactly are we planning to increase per capita income? This is not really clear and nobody wants to clarify this. Saurav, you want to take a shot at that? How is India going to increase its per capita income?
Well, if I could answer that, I wouldn't be discussing this right here. I would be somewhere else, Siddharth. But the fact of the matter is, this is the issue, right? I mean, that's where we the whole idea is to bring per capita income at $18,000. By the time we hit 2047. Now the question is, that's why I said it's a mix of all this. It cannot happen, and that means the GDP also would have to grow 9 times from today's number, and the per capita income would need to grow 8 times. Now, if you need to do all of that, you need an amalgam of things to come together. Like I said, manufacturing. Now, do not forget also that the digital public infrastructure is going to be a very, very big enabler. Personally, I'm a huge believer in the power of the digital and what the digital infrastructure India has been able to make. And I think this is where the government has actually put its might behind. And I think it will come together. And manufacturing, services, DPI, jobs, leading to jobs, all that will play a part in taking India to the next level of per capita income. It's a plan and it's a vision, and we need all together to work towards it.
Rahul, there's part two of that question, and I want to take that to you from the broader sort of political economy perspective as well. The gap between the rich and the poor is increasing. So that's a valid point, Rahul. You know, when we celebrate success, when we talk these big numbers and big goals, the reality of the K-shape also is something that stares us in the face. Do you think our politics will be able to address this very, very critical question, the gap between the rich and the poor?
We're seeing already a lot of politics play out over this, so that with the manner in which opposition leaders like Rahul Gandhi are attacking this government. But if you look at the fundamentals of economics and investment, ultimately, whether it is Indian companies or foreign companies, they need to invest in India in manufacturing for it to create jobs over time, and that's the only way that we'll be able to increase the number of jobs that we have. At the income levels of our country, we simply cannot afford to have the kind of welfare state that many European countries do, even though that's the aspiration being espoused by some opposition leaders. It will just end us in a public debt trap, which will be terrible for India's financial. And all of why there is enthusiasm around the India story internationally is because the government has been very conservative in how it spent public money by keeping a tight check on the fiscal deficit, which is also why India is joining so many global bond indices, which is why a lot of foreign money is coming to India. The moment you get reckless, we're seeing what's happening in countries in our neighborhood and elsewhere, and you don't want to be in that situation, which is why this whole conversation about India at 100 is so important, because it's not just about what can go right. It is also about discussing what can potentially go wrong. Remember, there is nothing at all guaranteed about India's rise. Everybody says, talks as if it's almost certain that India will be the third largest economy, that India will be an economic superstar. We've had periods in the past where there's been hope and that hope frittered away. So ultimately, it's about hunkering down, putting your foot on the ground and making the right steps continuously to ensure that we can uplift as many people as possible from poverty, not get stuck in a middle income trap, and raise them to levels of relative affluence. And it's a tough journey, and there is nothing at all, which is why we have people at different levels of the optimism spectrum joining us at the India at 100 event. It's not as if we have only India is going to be the next economic superpower. There's some speakers, very critical analysts who are coming, who will hold a mirror very loud and strong and explain, hey, don't get carried away. These are all the things that can go wrong.
Rahul, just to add to what you were saying, some of these challenges we've already seen. I mean, for instance, if you have, God forbid, any other black swan event like we saw during COVID, it can throw all calculations off gear, right? Then you have, there are still lots of pockets of stress. For instance, MSMEs still not where they should be. And this is one third of this economy. So there are 30% of this economy is powered by MSMEs. Now, if you have some of these, a black swan event or a crisis like we are now faced with geopolitical crisis across the world, now any of these things can throw the whole calculation spectrum off gear, which is why we need to really be mindful of where we want to go with it.
Oh, absolutely. And as we've seen now in what happened at the decade this morning, India is very closely linked to the global economy. If there is a sneeze or a it does have an impact in India as well. I think that's something we need to be very, very mindful of. It's not just about how optimistic you are about your own prospects.
Absolutely.
It's what's happening in the larger economy in the rest of the world.
Okay, Rahul, we have, I'm told, Divyansh Jain who wants the question. Divyansh, please ask your question.
Sir, I have two questions basically.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, I am basically from hospitality background as a front office receptionist.
Yeah, go ahead. Ask your question. We can hear you.
So, the thing is, how can we raise hospitality marketing in India?
Okay. All right. Who wants to take that question? Saurav, you want a shot at it? Marketing our hospitality sector better. That seems to be the question.
Well, I think it's linked to tourism, and it's linked to creating brands which are well known. I think India does have a few good global brands in the hospitality sector. There are startups also which are there, but the whole thing is also linked to global tourism. I think the government has also mentioned that tourism is one of the key areas which needs to be, because it's also linked to the services sector. It can be a great creator of jobs and employment. So I think the tourism sector linked to hospitality, I think that's the way to go. Shail, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I think Devansh, that's a wonderful question, and I'll just bring to your attention that Singapore, which is about 40 kilometers across as a country, smaller than Delhi, gets more tourists than all of India put together. And this is a time when you have brands like Taj Mahal, which is valued very conservatively at $10 billion. So the potential is immense. I'm sure the present government is doing all its best that it can in terms of creating good airports, creating the intra-country connectivity by good roads, expressway. So tourism, as well as the tourism industry, has a sunrise kind of a situation. And you see all sorts of global hotel chains coming into India over the next 3 or 4 years. The number of rooms that are going to be set up over the next decade or so will exceed the total number of rooms that we have as of now.
Also, Shail, if I may add, medical tourism to add to that, because we have a very good, health infrastructure in terms of the hospitals in the private sector. The government also pushing its weight behind healthcare. So, if the medical tourism part also can aid a lot of the inflow of tourists, and therefore it's linked to hospitality as well.
Okay, we have another question. This is a gentleman called Divyansh. We have to go to other questions. Please mute yourself. We have a gentleman by the name of Sankirthanam who has asked. Sankirtan, welcome. Go ahead, ask your question.
What are the most significant opportunities for the growth and development in Indian economy?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. Shail, you want to take a shot at that?
Sankirtanam, I think we have a crisis of plenty. Nearly all sectors are now growing in double digits, and that's primarily because local demand is unmet. But in terms of the sheer ranking, it would be manufacturing, followed by services, followed by agriculture. And we have this huge startup ecosystem which is attracting people from all sorts and all walks of life. You have 75 years old turning entrepreneurs, and you have 21 years old coming straight out of college and setting up startups. So it's a complete greenfield kind of a market in terms of sectors, in terms of stocks, and in terms of industries that are seeing great demand ahead.
Okay, someone has given us feedback saying that the registration link leads to the registration for this current webinar. How do we register for the main event? Fair enough. Thank you for your feedback. We will get that answer also hopefully typed into this chat very, very soon. I'm going to request my colleagues who are also listening in to help us with that. Question from Sujit Singh. Sujit, unmute yourself and ask your question. Please keep it short so that I can go across to other people as well. Go ahead, Sujit.
Hello, sir. My question is, I have to invest 10 lakhs rupees in the market. Is it right time to invest now?
Wow, I thought this would be a question on 2047, but Shell, you are the man in demand. Go ahead, answer this for us.
Yeah, Sujit, I would suggest that you break up your 10 lakh rupees into 20 installments of 50,000 rupees, and over the next every week, just invest those 50,000 rupees into three sets of funds: one large cap, one mid cap, and one small cap fund. We regularly post such names on our Twitter feed, and I will make sure that you have these three important names by end of day tomorrow. So please keep a watch out on the Twitter feed of Rahul, Siddharth, mine, and Sauravda. I'll make sure that those three names are there. So 20 installments of 50,000 rupees each into three funds.
Okay, so all those who are attending, for any daily queries, please log in. We have lots of market masters, special guests who come in through the day with our colleagues Shailendra Bhatnagar, Sakshi Batra, and others. We just had the State Bank of India chairman, Mr. Dinesh Kumar Khara, also speak with us live. But what we are not going to take now is questions on daily advice. Rahul, the mega trend shaping India's journey. You are a Davos veteran. You've been there so many times where you have met with the global opinion on India. Sometimes we are a little too inward looking. Rahul, what's the mood according to you as regards India? Because while we believe that there is an inevitability associated with it, people who are well-wishers overseas also have some suggestions and frank opinion that they want to share about our development strategy, our politics, our economic choices. What would you be able to share with our viewers?
Now, on the positive side, in the decade or so that I've been going to Davos, the whole buzz around the India story has changed dramatically. India was one of the many participants in years gone by. Now it is one of the prime participants. If you walk down the Davos Boulevard, just the sheer scale of the Indian presence is phenomenal. That registers. Earlier, it used to be much tougher for Indian journalists to get hold of global corporates or global thought leaders. Now, there is a clamor in wanting to speak to the Indian market because of how huge it is. And therefore, India's stock has risen several notches internationally. But if you talk to any big investor, they immediately start talking about factor market reforms and the fact that whether it is land, labor, agriculture, they'd like to see India, move down the reform path. And the problem is in the vexed politics that we have with a government that is sought to be put on the defensive, an opposition which is far more aggressive than it used to be. How center stage are reforms as a topic of conversation and policy in Indian politics? Take disinvestment, for example, which the finance minister didn't even talk about during her budget speech. So there is a political reality that is catching up, whereas a lot of the hype around the India story is based on expectations which require us now to walk down that tough path of reforms, which frankly are no longer, the Prime Minister would like to still push them through, but with his dependence on allies, it's no longer as easy as it was in his first two terms to be able to get that done. So which is why I come back to that point, Siddharth, that we discussed earlier, that there is absolutely nothing inevitable about India's rise, which is why every single year in this journey towards India at 100 is so significant, because you can make the right moves or you could end up making mistakes which will derail or slow down your growth process.
Absolutely. Rahul, we have two more questions, but before we do that, Pravesh Kumar and Garima Singh, who I'm told are waiting and standing by, what I want to do is to come to all three of you, starting with you, Saurabh. The mega trends that are going to shape India's journey in the coming quarter century or so. Throw a mega trend or two that you think is very significant into the debate here, and then we'll go across to those who are standing by for asking their questions.
I
Sorry.
think very clearly, thank you, Siddharth. I think very clearly one major mega trend would be climate energy transition. You know, that is something which India is committed to. That is something which India must do, and that is something which will, raise the bar and take the whole conversation around Viksit Bharat to a different level. The second very important megatrend, as I've alluded to earlier, is digitization, digital public infrastructure, which will go take welfare measures down to the last mile, and that is already happening. I think that is a second very major mega trend. And third, I think a mega trend which India must look at making sure more and more is the rise of manufacturing as a percentage of GDP. I think
Okay.
these three things together will power a lot of the vision for India by 2047.
Shall I come to you for your picks?
Siddharth, very clearly, the rise of domestic capital as the driving force to sort of set up new factories, the capital markets becoming a source of deep-ended funds for all industrialists and startups as well. As also, I agree completely with sort of the digitization is going to drive this dramatically, and of course, China plus one. I see a lot of global top 200, 300, 400 companies setting up at least a unit each, not by divesting out of China, but creating an alternative supply chain over the next 25 years.
Rahul, on that China question, the question that I want to ask, will we be able to settle our border disputes? Because national security and having these two pesky, troublesome neighbors, one directly there and one that has annexed Tibet, is that going to be a big challenge? And do you think that's going to get resolved in the years ahead?
Look, Siddharth, you come from an army background yourself, and you know well that for a long time the Chinese army has been nibbling into Indian territory, and this has been happening for decades. The big difference was that in the past, the Indians wouldn't push back quite as hard. Now, post Galwan, Prime Minister Modi's direction to the Indian Armed Forces, quite clear that if they come in, you push them right out, and if it leads to an escalation or a blowout, I'll stand by you, which is what led to Galwan in the first place. Which is why, despite all the Chinese pressure, despite the fact that they've tried to create events on the ground, India is still standing tall. So far, that was the position that India is trying to ask for the restoration of status quo ante, and China says, no, these are the facts on the ground. This is where we are. We're not going back. The big thing that's happened is that in this economic survey, we saw Dr. Anand Nageshwaran, our chief economic advisor, talk about how it actually may be counterproductive to be pushing Chinese investment away. He says, let the Chinese come in, let them invest. In any case, our foreign investment isn't growing, and therefore, if they come and invest, there'll be new manufacturing, there'll be new jobs, and that's how Vietnam has grown, that's how Mexico has grown. So that's the argument he made, which is quite contrary to what the External Affairs Minister or the Raksha Mantri have been saying in public and private forums before this. Since then, we've seen a clarification. We had the finance minister at the Business Today, India Today post-budget roundtable. We've heard from Piyush Goyal, the Minister for Commerce and Industry. They're saying the CEA's job is to think out of the box, to come up with policy suggestions. That's not our government's policy. But the CEA, we've all tracked policy for long enough. We all know that the CEA won't just say something out of the hat, right? It's obviously a debate or conversation that the government is sparking. And remember, with the prospects of Donald Trump doing well in the US elections, with the prospects of there being greater pushback against globalization, America increasing tariffs, it's not good for India to be only in the US basket or the US side. It's good to be able to hedge, but the government making clear that they will not do so at the cost of India's prestige, at the cost of India's esteem. It's a very delicate balancing act. We've got a gorilla sitting right on the other side of the fence, and we have to push back. They're not our friends, far from. As the famous Chinese saying goes, the only one sun can rise in the east, and they think it's the sun that rises in Beijing. They're not interested in a sun rising from Delhi.
Absolutely. We've done almost 30 minutes, and viewers, if you have questions, it might be better to type them in so that I can try and take as many. But since we had mentioned a couple of names, I want to go to Garima Singh, who has a question, and then we'll go to Pravesh Kumar. Garima, go ahead, ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Loud
So,
and clear.
my question is recent trends in Indian economy show a rise in household debt coupled with a decline in savings rates. What are the potential implications of this trend on the overall economic growth and stability of India? How might this affect our consumer spending and investment in long term?
Okay, that's actually not a question; it's an entire debate.
Yes.
But Saurav, please take a shot at that for us.
No, I think the household savings there has been also a kind of warning signal raised by regulators and the policy makers about how household savings are being more and more channelized into the markets and rather than capital formation into broadly somewhat unproductive areas like speculation, etc. That is one part of the problem. The other part is therefore, bank deposits and are also being sort of hit as a result of that. So I think that is a concern, and that I think we need to. Therefore, I think the policymakers are mindful of that, and the steps are being taken both at the policy at the government level as well as at the level of the regulators.
Okay.
With that.
The next question from Pravesh Kumar. Pravesh, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Pravesh Yadav this side. Hello.
Yes, go ahead. We can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Actually, my question is that in the March month, Mr. Raghuram Rajan, former governor, said that the 56,000 crore subsidy has been given to semiconductors. So, he said, it was a totally nonsense. In the meanwhile, the budget has been given 40,000 crore to the education. So that was my question. That when he was a governor, he said our economy in 2003 was just
Okay. Pravesh,
11
Pravesh, we will run out of time. I think I've got your question. You are asking a question about priorities in spending and allocation. And the point, Rahul, I'll request you to help us understand this. The the priorities that on one hand you are giving money for PLI, you want to boost manufacturing, move India to a situation where it has manufacturing along with services versus demands of the healthcare sector or the education sector. The last 10 years of Modinomics have seen a particular kind of direction. Do you think there is need for change in terms of the priorities?
See, that's a very complex question because there is no easy yes or no binary black and white answer. Ultimately, a government that was voted by citizens decided that they want to go down this route, and there is some logic to it. It's about building an ecosystem. So, yes, there are PLIs, and these corporates do get those production linked incentives. But to be able to think that you can go from 0 to 100 in terms of building out an ecosystem for semiconductors in double quick time is very difficult. It is a gradual process. So maybe it started on the easier side with just assembly of kits brought in from other countries, which is what we see in a lot of factories around Noida. Now we're seeing some fabs being built. The criticism to that is that they are much bigger than high-end fabs. But ultimately, you have to start somewhere and you have to take the steps towards, giving a handout is the easiest thing. Whether it is a Kisan Nidhi, whether it is free grains, free ration, whether it is a direct bank transfer, that's one approach. Now, that's at the core of the debate around economics in our country. This government's approach is that you build it organically, you bring these companies in, build out infrastructure, create new jobs. That's how incomes will grow over a period of time. The more direct approach, and we're seeing the consequences of that. We see that in Karnataka, for example, where the government is now struggling to be able to fulfill its promises because they've simply run out of money. Fiscal debt, the debt levels are rising. The state fiscal is out of control. So there are various problems, and I think ultimately there are certain things. Whether it's Trump economics, I mean, he thinks that tariffs need to be raised. Now, whether ultimately that's the right thing or not, if the people of the US vote him to power, it's a decision he'll take. But I fundamentally believe that going this approach where you're trying to build bottom up, and you can never build the Taj Mahal in one day. When you're trying to go bottom up, is probably the right route to go, but it's also a slower route, and the results will take some time before they're fully out. Till then, the jury will be out on the likes of Raghuram Rajan. We interviewed him at Davos, interestingly, and he made this very strong critique of production linked incentives. Ultimately, whoever's in government has to do what he thinks is the best to grow the economy.
Well, I think the next question is for you. This is from Tanish Kadian. I hope I pronounced that right. Tanish says he's an Indian
Hello.
student in
Yeah.
London. Go ahead, ask your
Can I
question.
complete?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, sir. My name is Tanishq. I'm an Indian student in London, and I've already heard many leaders talk about India being like a shining spot in the world economy when we are having this years going on. But in our ascent to being a superpower in 2047, how do you think we can take financial and even political lessons from countries like UK and USA?
Okay, Shell, the question uh, on the path to becoming a superpower in 2047. That is what Tanish is saying. What lessons are to be learned to avoid some of the financial sector pitfalls?
So that I just got a part of the question. I think it is what to avoid doing in financial markets so that you don't have a
Let me repeat that question because Tanish has typed that in. What financial lessons can India take from countries like the United Kingdom or America in its ascent as a superpower in 2047, looking at how these powers have seen financial losses in last few years? That's the exact question.
I think excessive dependence on foreign debt is not something that is quite fruitful in the long term. The Indian macro balance sheet, as we have tracked it from the mid 1990s, has always believed in domestic saving, and that's the path forward. The more you borrow from overseas, the more you turn into a case like Greece, a case like Turkey. Uh, I think it's sensible to grow slowly, relatively slowly, rather than fuel your growth by debt which is flighty in nature and depends more on, how should I say, the exchange rate rather than the returns that it can see. And of course, welcome foreign capital. So, desist on foreign debt and at the same time ensure that foreign capital comes in the form of equity rather than debt.
Adding to that bit, the amount of financial sector growth that we have seen in volume terms, if not profitability, on account of the digital public infrastructure, the massive uh, investments that we saw in startups, and the growth of some marquee brands. In what has happened in the past 3 4 years, and some of them have fallen by the wayside, are they themselves lessons of the kind that Tanish was asking us about? That runaway capitalism may not be the best solution.
That's a very good question, Siddharth, and I completely agree. The fact of the matter is, you don't really need overseas examples. The lessons are right here at home in many cases. For instance, the startups revolution you mentioned has, today as we speak, I think there is upwards of 1,25,000 registered DPIIT startups in this country, which makes this country the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. Now, that's a reality, but the flip side of it is that some of the startups, because of governance lapses, have led to serious losses for investors, serious losses of jobs, and therefore, could even be on the verge of have tried almost been on the verge of causing some systemic risks as well. Now, that is a lesson in itself. So,
Okay.
therefore, you need to have governance at the center of it. And I think startups have learned their lesson. Investors have learned their lesson that they are now insisting on paths to profitability before anything else. And I think some of these lessons need to be can be transported to the overall financial sector, corporate sector as a whole to make that much more resilient.
Rahul, as we wind down this conversation, I also want you to spend a minute on one of our sessions that where we hope to hear from one of the foremost people, economic thinkers of our time, former Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Subramaniam, on how India can reimagine its role in the global economic order.
And Dr. Subramaniam's views have a lot to do with increased spending on healthcare, on education. He's a big votary, for all that's going right with the India story. He thinks we should be spending a lot more on social infrastructure, and his one of his critiques really is that the government is focusing way too much on public physical infrastructure rather than social infrastructure, which also needs to be an area of focus. And it's always interesting to see what he has to say here. Also has concerns around how income disparities are growing, so we'll hear from him about it. There's also Ruchir Sharma, the very well-known global investor who will be speaking at the India at 100 Summit, Siddharth. He has a new book out on capitalism, and where we hope to engage with him is on how capitalism plays out in the Indian context. Unlike the United States and some other countries in Europe, India has never really been an advocate of free markets in the freest sense of the word. It's never really been in the Indian political DNA in post-independence India. And therefore, how does the capitalistic model play out in India? This idea that some national champions are being built out. This idea that you've got these few big companies, but the MSMEs aren't doing really well. Where there is so much income disparity, how do you look at questions around capitalism? So we'll be asking him that question. And then there is Professor Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, the former chief economic advisor of this government, who's got a new book. Guess what the title of that book is? India at 100. So he probably was watching Business Today when he wanted kya hona chahiye meri kitab ka title, and then that's how he came up with India 100. I'm of course just saying that for effect, but he's got a book and he's going to be doing a very interesting presentation on where he's of course very rara about the current situation. He's also been part of this government, so he'll be talking about how he sees India at 100, and we'll have the likes of Arvind Subramaniam, Ruchir Sharma, and many others. We were speaking to the Union Agriculture Minister Shivraj Singh Chauhan. He's come into a very important portfolio. We've heard from some other ministers many times at Business Today events, but I thought it'd be interesting to listen to some of the newer voices. Very important: rural development, agriculture, ultimately.
Skilling, Rahul, skilling.
No. I'm saying with him, rural development and agriculture.
Yeah, of course.
Jayant Chaudhary.
Yeah, no, I'm saying skilling also. There is a section with Jayant Chaudhary on skilling. That's another very critical.
The new ministers, new voices, fresh ideas, additions to the cabinet. So some of them will be coming and speaking about, what they're hoping to get done and their vision, which is why I think this is a very significant conversation platform, because it will give all of you who are listening in at this moment an opportunity to listen to these new ministers and see how they're sizing up the challenge and what they intend to do about it.
Absolutely, and lots of questions that have come in, but we won't be able to ask all of them. There are some questions, for example, on what kind of proven technologies do we have as regards climate change? What are the opportunities and challenges for India for embracing blockchain and artificial intelligence, and several others? There are some comments also, but let me just say this as we wrap up this precursor, small glimpse that we have tried to provide you into the India at 100 Business Today event, Thought Leadership Forum, which is where a lot of ideas with some of the best thinkers, speakers in the current time will be discussed, but it won't just be one-off. We will continue to do many more such events which can both inspire us and inform us. To that question about where you can register, the same link that you used for attending this webinar, soon after this webinar attends, is going to be the final registration link. That is what my colleagues here are telling us. But all of those who are interested in anything beyond just the daily politics that we see, sometimes politics that numbs us, politics that may not excite us, please tune into the Business Today multiverse every day through the week. And for many months and years now, we've been bringing the very best in terms of business and economics to you. And BT India at 100 will be one more event where you can learn so much about how India can go on a new growth path and what that new growth code will be. Rahul, thank you very much for your time. Saurav,
do read Business Today magazine for all the in-depth coverage of not just the event, but also lots more on India at 100 and beyond.
And he has some of the latest editions right over his right shoulder, viewers. So do go ahead, go to the website. All our offerings are there. And For those who wanted to get their daily dose of market gyan, Shell Bhatnagar is your man. Thanks very much once again to all of you and participants for tuning in. With that, it's a wrap. We'll see you again at India at 100. It was wonderful talking with you. Goodbye, take care, and be well.
Thank you, Siddharth.